in the cradle of winter's unyielding grasp, a single heartbeat defied the frost, whispering promises to the indifferent stars. Isolde Marin clutched the moonstone pendant at her throat, its cool surface a fragile anchor against the storm raging within and without. The wind howled like betrayed kin, whipping snow across the jagged borderlands where her pack's territory bled into the shadowed realms of the enemy. She had been one of them once, fiercely loyal, her Omega essence a quiet flame in the heart of the Frostfang clan. But loyalty meant nothing when fear twisted it into accusation. The elders had gathered under the blood moon 3 nights past, their eyes gleaming with the cold calculation of survival. "The child bears no mate's mark," Elder Thorn had declared, his voice a blade slicing through the great hall's hearth-warmed air. "It is a curse, a harbinger of weakness. The goddess has turned her face from you, Isolde." Her mate, former mate, Rorik, stood silent beside them, his broad shoulders hunched not in shame but in relief. The bond they had forged in youthful passion had frayed long before the swell of her belly, eroded by his ambitions and her unspoken doubts. Now it snapped like brittle ice underfoot. She had pleaded, her hands cradling the life within her, feeling its faint kicks like echoes of a distant drum. "This child is blessed by the old blood," she whispered, but the words dissolved into the murmurs of the pack. Omegas were vessels, they said, meant to carry the marked heirs of alphas, not anomalies that could invite rival packs to scent vulnerability. The border war with the Ironclaw clan loomed, a specter of steel and fang, and no room existed for Omegas who might birth the undoing of their strength. Banished at dusk, they dragged her to the edge of the world she knew. Rorik's hand on her arm was iron, his breath hot against her ear. "It's for the clan, Isolde, for all of us." She wanted to claw at his face, to draw the blood that once mingled with hers in fevered nights, but the guards held her firm. The snow swallowed her cries as they stripped her of her furs, leaving only a thin shift that clung like a shroud. The moonstone pendant, a gift from her mother before the fever claimed her, was all they allowed, a mocking token of the goddess's favor, or perhaps a cruel reminder of what she had lost. Now, as midnight bled into the endless dark, Isolde huddled against a wind-scoured boulder. The border's invisible line marked only by the shift in the wind's scent, her clan's pine and smoke giving way to the metallic tang of Ironclaw's iron forges, faint even through the blizzard. Her body trembled, not just from the cold that seeped into her bones like accusation, but from the betrayal that festered deeper. The child stirred again, a flutter against her palm pressed to her rounded belly. "Hush, little one," she murmured, her voice lost to the gale. "We are stronger than this frost." The moon hung low, a silver sickle slicing the clouds, casting fractured light over the drifts. Isolde's breath fogged the air in ragged bursts, each one a prayer to the deity of the wilds, the ancient force that alphas invoked in battle but Omegas knew in the quiet pulse of creation. She had always felt it, the lunar pull, stronger in her than in others, a whisper of paths unseen. But tonight, it mocked her. What path led to this? Abandoned like carrion for the crows, her body a battlefield where clan loyalty warred with the primal urge to protect the unborn. Memories clawed at her mind, sharper than the wind's bite. The night Rorik claimed her, under a full moon that bathed their den in ethereal glow, his alpha scent enveloping her like fire. She had believed in the bond then, in the destiny woven by the goddess's threads. But as her pregnancy progressed, without the sacred mark blooming on her skin, no silver scar to bind her child to a fated mate, the whispers began. Baron of Blessing, they called her, a vessel cracked. Rorik's touches grew perfunctory, his eyes drifting to the younger Omegas in the pack, their bodies unmarked by such scandal. Isolde shifted, pain lancing through her side as the cold numbed her limbs. Blood trickled from a cut on her palm where she had gripped the rock too tightly, staining the snow a fleeting crimson. She watched it seep away, absorbed by the white expanse, and wondered if her life would follow. The child kicked harder, as if sensing her despair, and she curled tighter around it, her shift frozen stiff against her skin. The moonstone warmed faintly under her fingers, its inner glow pulsing like a second heartbeat. A symbol of the old ways, when omegas were pathfinders, seers of hidden trails, not mere bearers of airs. Distant howls pierced the night, not her pack's mournful chorus, but something fiercer, closer to the border's foe. Ironclaw scouts, perhaps, drawn by the storm's chaos. Fear coiled in her gut, but beneath it burned a defiant spark. She would not die here, not while this life thrummed against her. The wind carried the faint crackle of distant fire, camp beacons maybe, or the imagined warmth of a hearth she would never reclaim. Her tears froze on her lashes, jewels of salt and sorrow. As the hours stretched into an eternity of white silence, Isolde whispered to the child, her voice a thread of warmth in the void. "We will find our way, my heart. Even if the world rejects us, the moon remembers." The pendant seemed to hum in response, a subtle vibration against her chest, as if the goddess herself leaned in to listen. But the cold deepened, the snow piling like a grave, and doubt crept in. Would sunrise bring salvation, or only the final frozen peace? In that fragile vigil, Isolde Maren became the border's ghost, her story etched in frost and unyielding will, waiting for the dawn to reveal what fate had carved from her exile. The first blush of dawn crept over the horizon like a hesitant lover, painting the snow in veins of pale rose and gold. But the cold remained a tyrant, unyielding in its grip. Isolde's fingers, numb and blue-tinged, still clutched the moonstone pendant, its subtle warmth the only betrayal of life in her frozen vigil. The child's movements had slowed to faint tremors, as if even the unborn sensed the fragility of their shared defiance. Her breaths came shallow now, each one a labored theft from the wind's domain. Her body a shield etched in ice against the border's merciless white. She had not slept, could not, with the howls echoing closer in the pre-dawn hush, a chorus that spoke of hunters on the prowl. Ironclaw, she thought, their scent sharpening in the air like forged steel, cooling in a quench. Or perhaps her own pack, circling back to ensure the curse was buried deep. The moon had dipped low, her sickle edge dulled by the encroaching light, leaving Isolde exposed, a lone figure in the vast, indifferent expanse. Blood from her palm had crusted over, a dark bloom beneath the fresh snow. And she wondered if the goddess demanded such stains as offerings. A shadow stirred at the edge of her blurred vision, subtle at first, like the sway of a pine in the gale, but then deliberate, a form cutting through the drifts with purposeful grace. Isolde tensed, her heart slamming against her ribs like a war drum, instinct urging her to curl tighter around the swell of her belly. Friend or foe? The figure was tall, cloaked in furs that blended with the storm's remnants, but the scent that reached her, rich earth and ancient pine, laced with the metallic bite of blood, spoke of alpha dominance, raw and unmasked. He emerged from the whitening haze, his breath visible in controlled plumes, broad shoulders straining against a cloak scarred by claw and blade. Aldrich Vane, king of the Ironclaw, though she did not yet know his name. His face was a map of weathered resolve, eyes like storm-gray steel fixed on the horizon, but they snapped to her with the precision of a predator scenting prey, or salvation. A gash marred his temple, fresh and weeping, staining the fur at his collar crimson. He moved with a limp, favoring his left leg where snow hid a deeper wound, the mark of a night skirmish evaded but not unscathed. Fleeing? No. Kings did not flee, they hunted shadows in the dark. Isolde's omega senses flared, a primal tug that warred with terror. His presence was a force, pulling at her like the lunar tide, awakening something buried deep. a curiosity laced with dread. She pressed back against the boulder, the rough stone biting into her spine through the frozen shift, her free hand splaying protectively over her abdomen. "Stay back," she rasped, voice cracked like thin ice, though fear made it a whisper. The child stirred faintly, as if echoing her warning, and in that moment she felt it. A pulse, not just her own, but something ancient radiating from within, brushing against the Alpha's aura like moonlight on water. Aldrich halted, 10 paces away, his nostrils flaring as he inhaled her scent. Snow and salt, mingled with the faint, wild bloom of impending birth. His gaze dropped to her form, taking in the thin fabric, the protective curl, the blood-flecked snow at her feet. No pity softened his features, only a flicker of recognition, deep and unspoken. He had seen exiles before, borders littered with the discarded. But this Omega carried no defeat in her eyes, only a fierce, unbowed fire. And beneath it, the child's essence hummed, a thread of old power that resonated in his veins like a forgotten song. The goddess's whisper, perhaps, or the curse that haunted his line, the unhealed wound of a king who had lost too much to ambition. He knelt then, slowly, as if the act bore the weight of kingdoms. His knees sank into the snow, armored gauntlets scraping against the crust, and for a heartbeat the wind stilled, the world holding its breath. Isolde stared, disbelief thawing the edges of her fear. An Alpha King on his knees before a banished Omega? His eyes met hers, not with conquest, but with a melancholy reverence that pierced her to the core. "You live," he murmured, voice low and resonant, carrying the timbre of distant thunder. "Against the frost's will, and what you guard. It sings of paths long sealed." She recoiled inwardly, the connection igniting like embers in dry tinder, instinctive, unwanted. His alpha pull was a storm she wanted to flee, yet it stirred the moonstone against her skin, warming it to a fevered glow. Fear coiled tighter. This was no savior, but a danger clad in enigma. Curiosity flickered despite herself. What wound drove a king to the border at dawn, bloodied and alone? "Who are you?" she demanded, though her voice trembled, the words tasting of vulnerability. "Aldrich Vane," he replied, not rising, his gaze never leaving the curve of her belly. "And you are no mere castaway. The old blood calls to me through you." The admission hung between them, heavy as the snow's burden, denying the bond even as it formed in the silence. He extended a hand, gloved and steady, not to claim, but to offer, warmth, perhaps, or the illusion of alliance. Isolde hesitated, the child's kick a reminder of stakes higher than pride. The sun crested fully now, bathing them in reluctant light, and in its glare she saw the guilt etched in his furrowed brow, the ethical king burdened by duties that scarred deeper than flesh. The howls returned, faint but closing, a reminder that borders were no sanctuary. Aldrich's jaw tightened, his offer lingering like a question in the air. Isolde's fingers tightened on the pendant, its pulse sinking with her racing heart, as curiosity warred with the rational urge to reject this fateful intrusion. In that suspended dawn, fear and wonder intertwined, birthing a connection neither could yet name. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The sun climbed higher, its pale light fracturing across the snow like shattered promises, but the warmth it offered was a lie, thin and fleeting against the border's eternal chill. Isolde's gaze lingered on Aldrich's extended hand, the leather of his gauntlet cracked and stained with the night's violence, a testament to battles fought in shadows she could only imagine. Her body ached, every muscle a knot of cold and exhaustion, yet the child's insistent pulse against her palm anchored her. a defiant rhythm that refused surrender. She wanted to refuse him, to claw back into the isolation that had become her armor, but the distant howls sharpened, slicing through the morning haze like warnings from the wilds themselves. Ironclaw scouts, or worse, her own pack's enforcers, come to finish what the frost had not. The air thickened with their approach, carrying the acrid bite of smoke and steel, mingling with the metallic tang of Aldrich's blood. He rose slowly, his movements fluid, despite the limp, eyes scanning the horizon with the honed vigilance of a king who had long learned to trust no dawn. "They come," he said, voice a low rumble that vibrated through the snow. Not a question, but a certainty. His gaze flicked back to her, assessing, not with the predatory hunger she feared from alphas, but with a weighted sorrow, as if her presence unearthed ghosts he had buried deep. Isolde pushed herself upright, the boulder scraping her back like accusatory fingers, her shift cracking with frost as she moved. The moonstone pendant swung free, catching the light in a brief, ethereal gleam, its warmth now a faint echo against her chilled skin, a symbol of paths she had always sensed but never walked. "Leave me," she whispered, though the words lacked conviction, her omega instincts warring with the rational barrier she had built against such intrusions. An alpha king kneeling at her feet? It defied the hierarchies etched into her bones, the very laws that had cast her out. Yet his scent enveloped her, earth and pine laced with the sharp undernote of guilt, stirring a curiosity she could not fully deny. Aldrich shook his head, a subtle negation shadowed by the furrows of his brow. "The border claims no favorites. If they find you here, unguarded." He trailed off, the implication hanging like the thread of fresh snow. Without another word, he shrugged off his cloak, a heavy mantle of wolf pelt and iron-threaded wool, and draped it over her shoulders. The weight settled like an unwelcome embrace, its residual heat seeping into her frozen limbs, carrying his essence, the steady thrum of a heart burdened by crowns and choices. She stiffened, rationalizing it as mere survival, not the tentative bridge it threatened to become. But the child stirred vigorously, as if approving, and Isolde clutched the edges tighter, the moonstone nestling against the fur like a hidden ember. He turned then, positioning himself between her and the approaching sounds, his broad frame a living barrier etched in scars visible even through his armor, silvered plates dulled by frost, reflecting the sun in cold glints. The howls crescendoed, a pack's fury converging from the east, where the ironclaw forges belched smoke against the mountains. Aldrich's hand rested on the hilt of his sword, not drawn yet, but ready, his breath steady in the face of what Isolde sensed was no random pursuit. Traitors within his own ranks, perhaps, or rivals scenting weakness in their king's solitary dawn vigil. Guilt shadowed his profile, a melancholy veil over the ethical core that had drawn him to this forsaken edge. Not conquest, but a quest for redemption he dared not voice. The first scouts burst from the tree line, 3 ironclaw betas, their eyes wild with the frenzy of the hunt, fangs bared in the morning light. They faltered at the sight of their king, confusion rippling through their snarls, but loyalty twisted by ambition drove them forward. "Treachery," Aldrich growled, the word a command that unleashed him. He met the lead beta mid-leap, his sword singing free in an arc of steel that bit deep, blood spraying across the snow in vivid crimson arcs, hot and steaming against the white. The clash echoed like thunder in the valley, metal on metal, grunts and howls mingling with the crunch of boots in drifts. Isolde pressed against the boulder, heart pounding in sync with the fray, the cloak's warmth a stark contrast to the visceral chill of violence so near. She watched Aldrich move, not with brute alpha rage, but with a measured grace born of duty's forge, each strike precise, sparing where possible, as if even in battle he weighed the cost of blood. One beta lunged past him, eyes locking on her with feral intent, But Aldrich pivoted, tackling the assailant into the snow, his gauntlet crushing the throat in a mercy kill rather than a drawn-out agony. Blood flecked his face, a deep red smear against his storm-gray eyes, and in that moment, Isolde saw the wound he carried. Not just the gash at his temple, but the deeper scar of a king who had ordered exiles of his own, choices that haunted his nights like unhealed bites. The last scout fell with a gurgle, sword buried to the hilt, and silence descended, broken only by their ragged breaths and the wind's mournful sigh. Aldrich sheathed his blade, blood dripping from its edge to stain the snow further, a symbolic offering to the indifferent earth. He turned to her, chest heaving, the guilt in his eyes now mingled with a raw vulnerability that pierced her defenses. "They were mine once," he admitted, voice roughened by exertion and regret. "Ambition poisons the pack as surely as frost claims the weak." He wiped the blood from his face, not with shame, but with the weary acceptance of one who had long rationalized such losses for the greater throne. Empathy stirred unbidden in Isolde's chest, a warmth that rivaled the cloak's, seeing in him the mirror of her own betrayal, the ethical heart crushed under duty's heel. She rose unsteadily, the moonstone pulsing against her skin as if awakening to this shared fracture. "And yet you fight alone," she said softly, stepping closer despite the rational voice screaming retreat. The child's kick was stronger now, a bridge between them, and for the first time she allowed the instinctive pull to linger, transforming fear into a fragile curiosity. His presence was no longer just danger, but a refuge forged in blood and necessity, where two exiles might shield one another from the world's encroaching storm. Aldrich met her gaze, the distance between them shrinking to mere breaths, his melancholy gaze holding hers with unspoken questions. "Not alone, if you allow it." The words hung, resisted by her pride, rationalized as alliance born of peril, yet the bond flickered to life, empathy weaving through the guilt they both bore. Hinting at redemption neither had sought. The sun warmed the bloodied snow, turning it to slush, and in that visceral thaw, Isolde wondered, what strength lay in choosing mercy over isolation when the enemy circled ever closer? The moonstone warmed further, a silent witness to the vow forming in the silence, as the wind carried away the last echoes of howls, leaving only the shared weight of survival's fragile peace. The bloodied snow thawed beneath their boots, pooling into rivulets that snaked toward the border's unseen divide, as if the earth itself sought to wash away the stains of betrayal. Isolde stood mere inches from Aldrich now, the wolf pelt cloak enveloping her like a reluctant confession, its weight both shield and chain. The sun's ascent cast long shadows across the drifts, turning the carnage into a mosaic of crimson and white. But the chill lingered in her bones, a persistent whisper of the night's near death. Her hand rested instinctively on her belly, where the child thrummed with renewed vigor, as if the violence had stirred some dormant fire within. Aldrich's eyes, storm-gray and shadowed by unspoken burdens, held hers without demand, his breath steadying in the aftermath, the scent of fresh blood mingling with the pine of his essence, a potent elixir that tugged at her omega core, resisted yet undeniable. She wanted to retreat, to rationalize this proximity as mere pragmatism, a temporary alliance forged in the crucible of survival. But the moonstone pendant at her throat pulsed warmer now, its inner light flickering like a captive star, syncing with the quickening rhythm of her heart. It had always been her talisman, a relic from her mother's line, whispered to hold the essence of the old pathfinders. Omegas who navigated not just trails through snow, but the veiled threads of fate itself. In the clan's rigid hierarchies, such gifts were dismissed as folklore, relics of a softer age before alphas claimed dominion through fang and forge. Yet here, in this forsaken dawn, it stirred, as if the goddess had tired of silence. Aldrich sheathed his sword fully, the metallic scrape echoing like a vow sealed in iron, and knelt once more, not in reverence this time, but to retrieve a fallen gauntlet from the snow, its leather soaked through with the blood of his fallen kin. His movements were deliberate, etched with the melancholy of a king who had spilled too much of his pack's lifeblood to maintain a throne built on fragile oaths. "The iron claw fractures from within," he murmured, voice low and resonant, carrying the weight of confessions long withheld. "Rivals sent my hesitation, my failures. I came to the border seeking a sign, not a soul to save." His gaze lifted to her, piercing through the rational barriers she clung to, unearthing the guilt that mirrored his own, the exile she had endured, the child she guarded against a world that deemed it curse. Isolde's breath caught, the wind whispering through the pines like distant uives, carrying the faint, acrid smoke of far-off forges. The child's kick came sharper, a jolt that radiated outward, and with it, the pendant ignited, not with heat, but with vision. The world blurred at the edges, the snowscape dissolving into threads of silver light, luminous paths weaving through the air like lunar veins. She gasped, clutching the stone, her vision expanding beyond the physical. She saw Aldrich's past unspool before her inner eye. Battles lost to ambition, a mate taken by poison from within the pack, her death a scar that bled into every decision he made. Guilt coiled around him like thorns, a crown of ethical thorns he wore in solitude, denying himself bonds for fear of repeating the tragedy. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling not with fear, but with the awe of revelation. The paths converged on him, then on her, intertwining with the child's unseen aura, a triad of destiny, where her bloodline's gift as pathfinder illuminated the way forward. Not mere survival, but redemption, the power to heal the fractures in his realm, to guide him through the political webs of betrayal that threatened to engulf the Iron Claw. The moonstone glowed visibly now, its light casting prismatic reflections on the snow, drawing Aldrich's eyes to it with predatory focus. He rose, closing the distance in a single step, his hand hovering near her shoulder, not touching, but near enough that his warmth breached the cloak's barrier. "Your light," he breathed, nostrils flaring as he inhaled the shift in her scent, now laced with the ethereal bloom of ancient magic, wild and untamed. "It calls to the old blood in me, the line cursed since my father's fall. I have sought a key to break the cycle of war and loss, but never dreamed it would come from one such as you." His voice cracked, the ethical king laid bare, his melancholy gaze alight with realization. She was no broken Omega, but the vessel of fate's revelation, the pathfinder whose child bore the unmarked promise of unity, a heir unbound by rival marks, destined to bridge clans sundered by blood feuds. In her, he saw the moral crossroads. To claim her as ally would mean forsaking the isolation of power, choosing compassion over conquest, vulnerability over the armored throne. Isolde recoiled from the intensity, the visions fading as quickly as they had come, leaving her dizzy, the pendant cooling against her skin like a spent ember. Rational thought surged back, a bulwark against the instinctive pull that now thrummed between them like a shared pulse. "This changes nothing," she said, though her voice wavered, the child's movements affirming the lie. The wind howled anew, scattering snowflakes like scattered omens, and in the distance, fresh howls rose, pursuers undeterred, drawn by the scent of blood and magic. Aldrich's hand finally touched her arm, light as a vow, grounding her in the visceral reality, fire from his touch against her chill, the metallic tang of battle on his breath, the deep blue of his eyes reflecting the sky's vast indifference. Yet the revelation lingered, a spiritual fracture in her exile's armor. What strength was this gift if it bound her to a king's redemption, forcing choices between her freedom and the destiny that now whispered of greater trials? The moonstone hummed softly, a lunar heartbeat in the gathering storm, as empathy deepened into something perilously close to acceptance. Aldrich's guilt mirrored her rejection, their wounds aligning like stars under the fading moon, hinting at a rebirth neither could evade. But as the howls closed in, the ethical dilemma sharpened. Would she embrace this key to his fate, or shatter it to reclaim her solitary path? Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw the howls shattered the fragile truce of revelation, converging like vengeful specters from the shadowed flanks of the mountains, their echoes bouncing off ice-crusted peaks in a symphony of pursuit. Isolde's vision cleared, the silver threads of fate retracting into the moonstone's depths, leaving her adrift in the raw surge of the present. Blood-slick snow underfoot, Aldrich's hand still warm on her arm, a tether she both craved and cursed. The pendant cooled against her chest, its pulse now a frantic echo of her own, as if the goddess herself recoiled from the storm, barreling toward them. Wind whipped through the pines, carrying the mingled scents of pine smoke from her old clan and the iron tang of Aldrich's forges, blurring the border into a cauldron of colliding worlds. Aldrich pulled her behind a jagged outcrop, his body a shield of corded muscle and scarred resolve, the cloak's fur brushing her cheek like a whispered apology. "Stay low," he growled, voice laced with the gravel of command tempered by guilt, his storm-gray eyes scanning the tree line where shadows coalesced into forms. Isolde crouched, her belly pressing against her thighs in a protective curl, the child's kicks now urgent warnings that mirrored the thunder in her veins. Rational fear clawed at her. This was no mere skirmish. It was the past rising like a tide of blood. Her Frostfang kin and his Ironclaw betrayers merging in a frenzy of territorial rage. The revelation of her gift hung between them, unclaimed, a moral precipice, to wield it as a weapon for his redemption or shatter it in pursuit of her own unburdened freedom. The first wave erupted from the east, 5 Frostfang enforcers, their furs matted with travel frost, eyes gleaming with the feral righteousness of the banished avenged. Leading them was Rorik, her former mate, his alpha frame bulked by winter's harsh forge, the scar from their bonding night now a twisted badge across his jaw. Betrayal etched his features, not remorse, but the cold fury of one who had traded love for clan ambition. "The curse spreads," he bellowed, voice cutting through the gale like a war axe, his gaze locking on Isolde with possessive venom. She flees to the enemy, carrying the unmarked blight that will doom us all. His pack fanned out, fangs bared, the air thick with their scent. Pine and fresh kill, a reminder of the hearth she had warmed with her hands. From the west, Ironclaw reinforcements crashed the fray, a rival alpha named Thorn, not her clan's elder, but Aldrich's shadowed counterpart, a hulking figure with eyes like molten steel and ambitions that festered like untreated wounds. He had been Aldrich's second once, until whispers of coup poisoned the bond, his betrayal a mirror to Rorik's rejection. "The king weakens with strays," Thorn snarled, his betas circling with drawn blades, their howls a discordant challenge that drowned the wind. Blood already scented the air from minor clashes, crimson sprays arcing against the snow like accusations flung from the goddess's own hand. Aldrich stepped forward, sword drawn in a fluid arc, his limp forgotten in the surge of duty's fire. But Isolde saw the fracture in him. The ethical king who had exiled dissenters in his youth, now facing the harvest of those mercy-denied choices. The battle ignited in visceral chaos, steel clashing against claw, grunts and snarls weaving with the crunch of snow under boot and paw. Rorik lunged first at Aldrich, their alphas colliding in a storm of raw power, fists and fangs trading blows that drew blood in deep rivulets, staining fur and armor alike. Isolde's heart seized, empathy twisting like a blade in her gut. She saw Rorik not as monster, but as the boy who had once knelt under moonlight, promising eternity, now warped by the same fear that had cast her out. Thorn flanked Aldrich, his blade whistling toward the king's unguarded side, forcing a parry that sprayed red across the drifts. The moonstone burned hot now, its light seeping through her shift, illuminating hidden paths amid the melee, silver veins snaking through the fray, revealing weak flanks, trajectories of doom, the fragile threads binding foe to fallen ally. She rose, compelled, the child's energy amplifying her gift into a torrent. "No more blood," she whispered, voice lost to the roar, but the paths obeyed, guiding her steps through the peril. A Frostfang beta charged her, eyes wild with zeal, but she sidestepped along the lunar line, her hand brushing his arm, not to strike, but to channel the vision. Flashes of his own lost kin, the moral cost of blind loyalty. He faltered, staggering back, confusion fracturing his snarl. Aldrich glanced at her, awe flickering through his guilt-shadowed gaze, but Rorik seized the moment, tackling him into the snow. Claws raking across the king's chest in a gash that wept deep crimson. Isolde screamed, the sound raw and primal, the moonstone flaring like a beacon. Paths converged on Rorik, illuminating his betrayal's root. Not just ambition, but fear of her unbound power, the child who would eclipse his markless claim. "You rejected us for your throne," she cried, stepping into the circle of combatants, the air shimmering with her aura. Thorn paused, blade raised, drawn by the ethereal glow, his own visions assaulting him. The pack he sought to rule, crumbling under endless war without the Pathfinder's grace. Aldrich surged up, shoving Rorik off with a roar, but held his strike, eyes pleading with her, forgiveness or war. Love in this crucible demanded choice, to forgive the past's thorns, binding her freedom to his redemption or unleash the gift as severance, claiming liberty in isolation's sharp embrace. Rorik whirled on her, breath heaving, blood dripping from split lips, his eyes a storm of wounded pride. "You were mine, Isolde. This abomination ends here." But the child's pulse thrummed through her, a counterpoint to his rage, and the paths whispered of unity's cost. War would claim them all. Forgiveness might heal the sundered clans, but at the price of her solitary spirit. Aldrich reached for her, hand slick with his own blood, voice breaking through the din. "Choose, Pathfinder. Mercy crowns no one alone." Thorn and the pack circled tighter, blades poised, the wind howling like the goddess's unresolved lament. Isolde clutched the moonstone, its light fracturing across their faces, white gelido snow, vermelho profundo blood, cinza asso resolve, tearing her between the freedom of flight and the redemptive chain of love. In that suspended fury, the ethical precipice yawned. What was strength, if not forgiving the betrayers to forge a new dawn, or was true liberty in letting the old world burn? The howls peaked, a spiritual verdict hanging on her unspoken word, as blood pooled warmer than the sun's indifferent rise. The bloodied drifts churned under the press of paws and boots, a visceral churn that mirrored the storm raging in Isolde's soul, each crimson stain a petal of the past unfurling in relentless accusation. The moonstone burned against her skin like a brand of fate, its light fracturing the melee into shards of silver prophecy, paths twisting through the fray like veins of moonlight on frozen rivers, illuminating not just the clash of steel and fang, but the deeper fractures of loyalty betrayed. Rorik's eyes bored into hers, wild with the possessive fury of one who had once claimed her under a harvest moon, now reduced to a shadow snarling over the ruins of their bond. "End it, Isolde!" he spat, blood flecking his lips, his claws extended as if to reclaim what the clan had deemed forfeit. The wind howled in response, whipping snow into a blinding veil that tasted of salt and iron, carrying the distant crackle of unseen forges like the goddess's mocking laughter. Aldrich staggered to her side, His chest, a ragged canvas of red furrows where Rorik's claws had torn through armor and flesh, yet he stood unbowed, his hand gripping her arm with a desperation veiled in kingly restraint. The guilt in his storm-gray eyes was a chasm, etched deeper by this confrontation with his own ghosts. Thorn, circling like a vulture, his rival's sneer a mirror to the exiles Aldrich had sanctioned in darker days, choices that now circled back as living indictments. "The packs demand blood," Aldrich murmured, voice a low thunder amid the snarls, his breath hot against her ear, laced with the coppery tang of his wounds. "But you see beyond it. Choose for us all." His touch grounded her, a spark of fire against the encroaching cold, stirring the instinctive pull she had long resisted. The Alpha's melancholy essence weaving through her defenses like roots seeking soil, promising redemption not as reward, but as the hard-won forge of shared scars. Isolde's heart hammered, each beat syncing with the child's fierce thrum, a dual rhythm that amplified the moonstone's glow until it bathed the combatants in ethereal pallor, turning their faces to masks of ghostly revelation. The paths unveiled themselves fully now, not as abstract whispers, but as visceral truths. Silver threads binding Rorik to his ambition's hollow throne, a Frostfang pack fracturing under endless border wars without the Omega's intuitive grace. Lines snaking to Thorn, revealing his coup as a desperate bid to heal the Ironclaw's own unhealed wounds, born of Aldrich's past mercies withheld. She saw it all, the moral web of power and compassion, where forgiveness might mend the sundered realms, birthing a unity that transcended Alpha marks and Omega vessels, or where war's liberty would leave her free but forever adrift. The child's gift, a solitary flame in an uncaring night. Thorn lunged then, his blade arcing toward Aldrich's flank in a silvered blur, but Isolde stepped forward, the Pathfinder's instinct guiding her into the arc's lethal curve. Her hand extended, not in violence, but invocation, the moonstone flaring as she channeled the vision into him, a flood of silver light that pierced his mind's armor, forcing him to confront the pack's true peril, not Aldrich's rule, but the cycle of betrayal that would doom them all to frozen graves. Thorn froze mid-strike, eyes widening in horror as the threads revealed his own kin lost to needless skirmishes, the ethical cost of his ambition laid bare like exposed bone. He dropped his sword, staggering back into the snow, a guttural whine escaping his throat, not defeat, but the shattering of pride's illusion. "What sorcery is this?" he rasped, but the question dissolved into the wind, his betas faltering in echo, their howls turning to uncertain whimpers as the light rippled outward, seeding doubt in their ranks. Rorik whirled on her, undeterred, his form shifting halfway to wolf in a surge of primal rage, fur rippling across his shoulders like storm clouds gathering. "You betray us for him?" he roared, charging through the silver haze, claws aimed for her belly, the unmarked life he had rejected as curse. Isolde met his gaze, tears freezing on her lashes like diamonds of unresolved grief, the moonstone's warmth spreading through her veins like liquid fire, igniting the Omega fire she had buried under layers of exile's shame. "I betray no one," she countered, voice steady amid the chaos, carrying the weight of philosophy forged in frost. "What is strength, if not choosing mercy when the world demands blood? You cast me out for your freedom, Rorik, but true liberty lies in healing what we break, not in the grave we dig for others." The paths converged on him then, a luminous cage of revelation. Visions of their shared past under the clan's hearths, the love that had bloomed before ambition's poison, now twisted into this moment of reckoning. Rorik halted inches from her, his claws trembling, the silver light reflecting in his eyes like shattered mirrors of regret. The child's kick pulsed through her, a shared heartbeat that echoed in the air, brushing against his alpha senses with the ancient power he had feared. A promise of heirs unbound by rivalry, pathfinders who could guide the packs to peace. His snarl fractured into a pained howl, the beast within recoiling from the truth. Forgiveness would cost him his hardened throne, but war would claim the soul he had once bared to her under the moon. Aldrich moved to her side, his free hand clasping hers over the moonstone, their palms slick with mingled blood. Hers from the night's vigil, his from the fresh wounds, a symbolic union of suffering's alchemy. The packs encircled them, weapons lowered in the light's thrall, the wind falling to a hush that amplified the distant weavos like spiritual echoes. Thorn knelt first, head bowed in submission, his betrayal transmuted into reluctant fealty. The Ironclaw betas followed, their howls softening to mournful accords. Rorik lingered, torn between the rival Alpha's pull and the Omega's unyielding gaze, his body shuddering as the paths whispered of rebirth. A united front against the greater threats looming beyond the borders where true enemies gathered in shadowed councils. Isolde felt the weight of it all, the love that demanded sacrifice, binding her freedom to this ethical king's redemption, or the solitude of flight, where compassion's flame might gutter alone. The moonstone hummed, a lunar heartbeat urging choice as the sun crested higher, gilding the bloodied snow in gold, turning the battlefield into a canvas of potential dawn. Rorik extended a claw-tipped hand, not in attack, but hesitation, his voice breaking. Isolde. Sister of the moon, what path do we walk? The question hung, a spiritual precipice, forcing her to weigh the chains of forgiveness against the isolation of unyielding liberty. Aldrich's grip tightened, his melancholy eyes pleading silently. Mercy or war? Love or the void? In that suspended breath, the goddess's verdict waited on her word, the air thick with the scent of thawing blood and unspoken vows as the packs held vigil, their fates entwined in the fragile web of her emerging will. The silver paths of revelation lingered in the air like fading auroras, their luminous threads weaving a fragile canopy over the bloodied drifts, where the packs stood frozen in the moonstone's ethereal thrall. Isolde's breath came in shallow waves, each one tasting of iron and pine. The wind's caress now a gentle sigh rather than a lash, as if the goddess herself exhaled in anticipation. Her hand trembled in Aldrich's grasp, their mingled blood slick and warm against her palm, a visceral seal on the precipice she teetered upon. The pendant at her throat pulsed with a final, insistent rhythm, its glow softening to a deep, resonant blue, mirroring the vast sky arching overhead, a lunar echo in the sun's domain, symbol of the old blood that bound her to this moment of unyielding choice. Rorik's extended hand hovered, claws retracted to blunt tips, his eyes no longer storms of rage, but fractured mirrors reflecting the Omega he had forsaken. The Frostfang enforcers shifted uneasily behind him, their howls silenced into ragged breaths, the silver visions still rippling through their minds like aftershocks of truth. Thorn knelt deeper in the snow, his massive frame bowed not in defeat, but in the humbled weight of foresight. The paths had shown him the Ironclaw's doom without her guidance, a realm crumbling under the weight of endless feuds, where power's throne became a pyre of isolation. Aldrich's grip tightened, his wounds seeping fresh crimson into the white, yet his storm-gray eyes held hers with a melancholy plea, the ethical king stripped bare, his guilt a crown of thorns, forged from exile's past, now offering itself for her mercy's forge. "What path, Isolde?" Rorik repeated, his voice a rasp carved from regret, the alpha pride yielding to the spiritual fracture she had wrought. She saw it all in the path's fading whisper, the rebirth awaiting, not as triumphant union, but as sacrifice's quiet alchemy. Freedom beckoned, a solitary trail snaking into the wilds, where she could nurture the child unbound, her gift a private flame against the world's indifference. Yet destiny tugged counterwise, threads intertwining her with Aldrich's wounded realm, demanding she heal the fractures with compassion's blade, forgiving Rorik's rejection, binding Thorn's ambition to a greater whole, crowning Aldrich's guilt with the redemptive light of shared rule. Love, in this lunar gospel, was no velvet reward but a trial of wills, resisted in her rational exile, rationalized as alliance in the refuge's warmth, now demanding acceptance as the price of collective dawn. The child stirred within her, a powerful surge that radiated outward like a heartbeat echoing through the snow, brushing against every soul in the circle. It was no mere kick, but a manifestation, the unmarked air's ancient power amplifying her own, a bridge of blood and spirit that silenced the last murmurs of dissent. Isolde closed her eyes, the wind weaving through her hair like fingers of forgotten kin, carrying the faint, distant weavos of the wilds, affirmations from the deity of the untamed, urging faith over despair. What was strength, if not this? Choosing the chain of mercy to shatter the cycles of war, trading her liberty for the rebirth of realms sundered by fear. The moonstone warmed one final time, its blue light enveloping them all, turning the bloodied snow to a canvas of thawing promise, where white gelido yielded to rivulets of vermelho profundo, symbolizing wounds cauterized by forgiveness's fire. She released Aldrich's hand only to clasp Rorik's, her touch light yet unyielding, channeling the path's essence into him, a vision of unity where Frostfang and Ironclaw forged borders not of steel, but of shared hearths, guided by the Pathfinder's line. The path of healing, she declared, voice steady as the earth's core, resonant with the philosophy born of her suffering. Not for thrones or marks, but for the souls we nearly lost to frost and fury. Forgive and be forgiven. Unite or perish divided. Rorik's fingers closed around hers, trembling, the bond of their past transmuted, not rekindled as mates, but redeemed as kin, his ambition yielding to the moral imperative she embodied. Tears traced frozen paths down his cheeks, melting into the snow like offerings to the moon's memory. Thorn rose slowly, his molten eyes cleared of venom, extending allegiance to Aldrich with a nod heavy as ancient oaths. The packs converged, howls rising in harmonious chorus, not of conquest, but of rebirth, the air vibrating with the spiritual renewal of packs once fractured. Aldrich pulled her close then, his arm encircling her waist with reverent care, the child's pulse syncing with his own, a union forged in sacrifice, where his guilt found cure in her compassion, his dutiful melancholy lifting like mist under the sun. "You are the key I sought," he whispered, breath warm against her temple, laced with the scent of blood and pine, his ethical heart laid open. "Not to rule, but to redeem. With you, the old blood flows anew." Isolde leaned into him, the resistance crumbling at last, rational barriers dissolving in the instinctive tide of acceptance. The love that bloomed was no fairy veil, but a hard-won flame, kindled in exile's cold and battle's heat, proving itself through choice rather than fate's whim. The moonstone settled against her skin, its glow fading to a subtle ember, a recurrent talisman now shared, a symbol of paths navigated, wounds healed, and destinies entwined. As the sun climbed, gilding the mountains in Dorado Antigo, the groups turned inward, tending the fallen with hands once raised in wrath, the border blurring into a threshold of possibility. Snowflakes danced lazily now, not as harbingers of death, but as confetti of Renascimento, the wind carrying whispers of future councils under lunar temples, where omegas like her would guide alphas through the veils of power and despair. In that collective exhale, Isolde felt the weight lift, the rejection transfigured into strength, her hidden gift no longer a curse, but the goddess's revelation. Aldrich's hand rested over hers on her belly, their eyes meeting in silent vow. Together, they would birth not just a child, but an era of compassion's reign, where every alpha's wound found its omega healer. The distant forges crackled like hearth fires welcoming wanderers, and the weavos softened to lullabies, echoing the faith that had triumphed over isolation. Rebirth came not in glory's blaze, but in the quiet union of scarred souls under the watchful eye of a moon that remembered all. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.